Hey folks, this week we're going to give you a recap of recently played games. Those would be Arcana Rising, Hadara, and The Spill. We're going to give you some strategy tips on Castles of Burgundy and finish up with our ranking of the Scythe-based factions.
You're listening to the Beans and Dice podcast, a podcast about how we game.
Hey folks, welcome to the Beans and Dice podcast, a podcast about
how we game.
I'm Mitchell.
I'm Rob.
And I'm Wayne.
And we're going to start off with what we're going to be calling our new segment, what we've been playing. Give credits to Rob on that one.
See what
we're
you
just
did
gonna
there.
Try to see what you did there, sir.
Oh, yeah. Yes, got it.
We're just going to try to standardize our segments a little bit. And also, you've been asking, so we're going to go ahead and at least attempt to go weekly. So you should be hearing this segment every week on Sundays instead of just every other week. And even though, the last few weeks it hasn't been every other week, it's been like maybe every other month, but we're working on it. So who wants to start off first? Rob, Wayne? I'll let one of you guys talk about one of your recently played games.
I'll go first. Last week I got to play a 2019 game, Hadara, which is it's a kind of like a civilization building game. You want to think Seven Wonders, basically. It's 2 to 5 players from Hans Ingluck. The designer is Benjamin Schwier. It's
God bless you.
Yeah,
exactly.
But it's sort of a head. You get there's 3 eras of the game. You get a stack of cards, and you are drafting. So it kind of has a little bit of that, pick and pass that you would get with like Sushi Go or even Seven Wonders, right? And you're picking a card, and then you're passing it on, and then you play that card. But you have to pay for the cost of the card with resources, and you start the game with different sort of civilizations. And then as you increase your cards, and the cards give you additional abilities, and those abilities then are permanent sort of additions. So you have always a certain amount of military, always a certain amount of culture, always a certain amount of other things. And you have basically there's four stats that you get that you're building up, and you're using those to play the cards. And as you play the cards, they get discounted by the card count and by how much you have of the ability. But what was really cool is at the end of each kind of round, there's the cards that get passed, because you basically get to, you pick one and you pass one, you pick one and pass one, and just like a little rondelle in the middle that moves around that shows which pile you pick from. Once all the cards have gone through, then you can go back in and buy the cards that everyone else passed on in that round and use them. So it's kind of pretty cool. And then there's, you can build monuments, and then there's, some civilization bonuses and sort of set collection stuff. So it really is sort of a reworking of Seven Wonders, if you will. It kind of reminds you of that a lot, but it has enough sort of differences that really makes it sort of interesting, and you can approach it from different sides. I think I ended up coming in second place, and I built all of the sort of monuments, but the person who came in first did the set collection, and it was all very close, and it was pointsality. The ending scores were in the hundreds or 200s. But it was a really pretty game. Very colorful. The art was kind of very nice.
Very colorful. Yep. I'm looking at some pictures here on BGG, and man, there's a lot of color in this game.
Yeah.
I've seen the box before. I've heard of it before. And is there something about the number 5 in this game? Because on the cover, it's broken into 5 segments. The map looks like it's a pentagon. It plays to 5 players. Is that anywhere in the theme, or is that just how it's made?
I think that's just kind of how it's made. Maybe I've only played it that once or twice that last weekend, so I haven't gotten a ton of plays in and haven't looked into it too much. But it was a lot of fun. It was fast. I mean, we played 4-player, and we were done in 40 minutes. And it was 3 of us were first time players, and then we re-racked it, played again, and about the same amount of time. And I believe I've heard some of the Dice Tower folks, maybe Z or a couple of people talk about Hadara in the past. It's a really cool game. I mean, I think it's I would say it's a try before you buy in sort of our rankings, but it's definitely one that if you like games like Seven Wonders, if you like games where you're card collecting, set collecting, and using those cards to buy additional things, this is a cool game. It's very pretty. I might check it out. So
it sounds like more of a gamer's game if you like Sushi Go. That's kind of what you said a while ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I this artwork, I couldn't place exactly who the artist is, but I feel like I recognize it. And I just looked. I'm going to butcher these names, but Dominic Meyer, who was the artist on Paleo, and Andreas Resch, the artist on Great Western Trail. Or they did the art on here. So They share some DNA. I can see something in the art style, so that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Great Western Trail, I don't know. If it was the cover art, I don't know if I would say that too loud, because I know that was one of the most hated on games like in history of box art design for those three guys kind of staring dully into the distance on that box. But yeah, I see the weight. You mentioned it shows here on the BGG a 2.21 complexity rating. So I mean, that looks like it's definitely on the lighter side.
Well, I mean, I would say, on a 1 to 5, a 2.5 is medium weight, so it's a little.
It's a little bit
lighter
on the
than
lighter
medium,
side.
a little bit on the lighter side, but
Okay.
that's what I'm saying. It's not much more complex than Seven Wonders.
Okay.
I think where the complexity is as you draft, you draft a card, you pass a card, you have to pay attention. There's that little middle rondelle that moves around. In each round, you're going to take 2 cards from one of the 5 areas. So it's not that you're getting a hand of cards from your neighbor. It's the rondelle in the middle moves, and as it moves, you're going to be picking different cards. So you have to kind of think ahead of going, okay, well, I'm going to buy this card from this color or military or civilization, whatever it is, and then I know next round I'm going to be picking from this area, so I need to make sure I have the resources to buy it. And so a couple of the players went balanced and tried to get sets of cards from each of the colors, and then myself and another person just went all in on 1 or 2 colors. So it's kind of almost like Nidavellir, where when you're collecting those dwarves, do you go all in on one, or do you try to balance it out? And I think both were very fairly viable, strategies. So
how about player interactivity here? Player interaction, is there a lot other than just that kind of it's not even really a drafting, I guess, is it?
Well, and that's what. So after you go through that each of the 3 errors, when you go through the round of picking up the 2, once the deck is empty, all of the discarded cards are available for buying, where you can go and purchase those cards. And so you have to try to remember, okay, I really wanted that one card that I had to bury because I couldn't afford it or whatever, and it's 4 down on that stack. So you have to be careful of who's picking what. So everyone can go to say the Reds military. Everyone can go to the military and draft all those leftover cards, and then there's the money and the food and the culture. So that's where the player interaction happens, because I can see this person really wants culture, and that card's really good for them, so I'm going to draft it now because it helps me and it prevents them from getting that extra culture that they need. So there's 2 phases to each round. There's the draw 2, pick 1, right? And then there's the drafting all the rest that was left over. And that's sort of where it can get a little cutthroat, because there was a couple of times towards the end of the game where I'm like, please let that card get there. Please let that card get back to me. And, it doesn't, or I need 1 more purple. And then all 4 other people buy all the purples out, and I don't get the purple that round. So it was pretty cool.
So how'd you come across this game? Did you seek it out, or was someone trying to show it at game day, or how did that work out?
Game day. We have a game day a couple Saturdays a month where I go to my buddy's house, and a friend of mine works for some game companies. He's got a 2,500 board game collection. And so he always brings a stack of new games that he wants us to play. And he was at Gen Con working for some vendors and stuff, and so he brings that, and every now and then we get to play his prototypes because he's got a couple of games in the pipeline. But this was fun. In the next couple of weeks I'll probably talk about a few more of the games that he brought to game day, because we ended up playing, I think, 4 new games to all of us that last Saturday.
Cool.
So
Rob, what you got?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about a game actually I hadn't really heard anything about until I was at one of the guys in our game group, Nick Oben's house last week. And we went over to, our primary goal wasn't to play games. We had a couple other things we were taking care of. But me and Joe from our group got together, and Nick had a game that he had recently gotten called Arcana Rising. And again, this is a game I really it wasn't on my radar at all. It's a 2021 release. Let me just real quick here, the BGG rundown on it. 1 to 6 players, advertised here 20 to 60 minutes. The weight's a 2.25, so real close to Hadara, almost identical as far as the complexity rating. Designer Tim Armstrong, and artist, here we go, Yaroslav Radetsky, something like that. I hope I'm close. Hope I didn't completely butcher that, but it's by Gray Fox Games.
I'll allow it.
Okay, you allowed. I passed the test on that one. Okay, and I'm gonna touch on theme here. I'm not the theme expert here, but anyway, so you're playing as spellcasters, and I'm going to start off by kind of comparing it, and it's got a lot of differences, but it gives me some feelings of Century Spice Road, in that you're playing cards out It doesn't have the play out and pick up mechanic, which is so popular with Century Spice Road, where you have to take an action to pick them all up. But basically what you're doing is you're playing, it's an engine builder, and it's drafting. So you've got a hand of cards. As you do the draft, you're going to pick one card. I think it's out of, it's either 6 or 7 that you start with. You're going to pick one card, kind of put it face down in front of you, and then you're going to pass the cards, depending on the round, either to the left or the right. We alternated back and forth. But you pass the cards, and then everybody's going to reveal. So you're going to pick one card at a time. You're going to reveal the card in front of you, and then you're going to play it into a tableau. And there are, I believe it's 5, maybe 6 different types of magic or of spellcasting arcana that you're building up in front of you. But one of the cool mechanics of the game is it's got this board that's in the center of the table that has these really cool poker chips. You know, poker chips is the popular thing now. So even though it's not chip theory games with all their poker chips, but it's, you know, nice, solid, heavy poker chips, and you're going to draw them out of a bag, and you're going to fill them in on this board left to right. And of the, I'm just looking at a picture here. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 5 different types of magic. You're going to lay out. Each one of them has 2 chips in the bag. And you're going to play 3, I guess, let's call them eras of the game. And each era, you're going to have 6 rounds. And so there's going to be 6 drafts. But each round, as you draft these cards, you can play them to the house that they belong to. So each card is going to match either like nature or fire or gold, the different arcanas, the different types of magic you have in the game. And you've got a board in front of you that has a picture of each one. You can either play the card face up to the correct area, to wherever it slots in for those 5 different types of magic, or you can burn the card and not reveal it and just discard it. And when you do that, you are activating the magic for that round. So each card, again, you're kind of deciding, you're having to burn or waste a card if you want to activate the magic and take advantage of the cards that you've played through previous rounds face up into those different areas. And so each one does a different thing. Some of them will give you some types of essence. Some will allow you to trade one essence for another essence. But each round, I mentioned this board in the middle of the table that's got these poker chips in it. Poker chips are just purely for show. They could have been practically anything, but they look real nice, and they're nice heavyweight chips. But each one of them has one of the types of magic. So like the BGG picture I'm looking at here, the first round, it has nature and fire on it. And so if I burn a card this turn, I will activate all of the cards that I have placed in my nature area and in my fire area. And so each of the first 5 of the 6 rounds of each era or of each age or whatever, it's going to have just 2 types of magic, 2 types of magic, 2 types of magic that trigger. The very last age, or the very last round of each age, and again, I'm making up these terms, I don't recall what they're specifically called, but you can, if you burn the card at the end of the round, you can actually activate all of the types of magic, but you only activate the bottom card, the last card you played, to each of the different types. And so there's a lot of really fun, meaty decisions in the game about drafting cards, playing them down, and then if you've got a card that's really good, and then you get that next hand passed to you, and you've got another really good, let's say, actually I think it's blood, not fire. I apologize, I was calling it fire, but your blood magic. If you get another really good blood card, you have to make that decision. Do I want to slot it in below or on top of the other blood card that I've already played? If I activate it in one of the first 5 phases, first 5 rounds of the age, then I get to activate all the cards. But then that big last round, you're always, pretty much everybody that last time is looking to burn a card and activate their different types of magic, because you get to go down the list and do each one of them. But again, in that case, you're only doing the bottom card, the last card that you played. So it really makes for a lot of really interesting decisions on how to slot this stuff in. And then at the end of the game, you're getting points based on 3 of the 5 types of magic give you a point for every 3 tokens of that type that you have on there. One of them, the gold one, gives you, it's a 1-to-1 transfer. It's the hardest one to accumulate during the game, but you get 1 point per. And then the blood magic that allows you, the blood arcana actually gives you -1 point for every one of those that you get at the end of the game. So you're actually trying to, but they make it super easy to get that blood magic, that blood arcana. So you're actually just piling chits onto blood, and then you're trying to activate other cards. Some of the, like I say, a lot of the cards allow you to transfer one type of magic to another type, or you could actually, I didn't mention before, but you actually have a cost if you play the card face up, it's going to have a cost on it, and you either have an option of paying a particular type of magic at a lower rate, or that each one of them has, you can spend any type of magic that you want, but maybe like a 5-to-1 ratio. So you have to burn 5 instead of 1 nature magic. I might have to burn 5 blood magic. And so that's another kind of cool mechanic, that you're going to build up all this blood, or you have an option to build up all this blood, arcana, and magic. And then at the end of the game, you're trying to offload all that stuff to draft other cards. You're trying to get rid of that blood magic. It's a really cool game. A fair amount of interactivity again with the draft. The whole game is draft. I'm a big fan of draft mechanic, and I like engine builders. And this is definitely an engine builder, because you're building those cards up, and a lot of them will interact off each other.
So that you give this, really awesome game rundown, but you didn't talk at all about the first. No, not it.
Oh,
not
not
even
theme.
the
Oh,
theme.
not even give me a theme.
No.
Okay.
The first ever board game to use an abacus in the game. How does
That's
that
going to be my question. This is the question we were all
That's
waiting
right.
for. Is it worth
Nick Oben,
the
mentioned
obvious
that.
price upgrade that you get to get an abacus in there?
So absolutely not. The abacus is a complete gimmick. We agreed unanimously, the three of us that played, that the abacus is completely just fiddly. It's one of those deals that if you bump it too hard, all of your stuff's going to slide around. And I think on the show the other day, the call-in show we did, somebody compared it to the foosball counters on a foosball table. So yeah, I mean, they're little. It is foam. I think Nick explained to us on the show the other day that it's foam. He said it came in pieces and he had to put it together. I mean, it's cool. It kind of looks neat on the table. It is 3D. I mean, it's not just a flat thing, but those little it's real lightweight plastic pieces that you're sliding back and forth, and they're not real accurate.
What are you tracking with it?
You're tracking your points, because you do get some points as the game goes along. Sometimes some of those cards that you play face up will say, just for playing this card, you get 3 points, or for doing this kind of transition from one type of arcana to another, you might get some points. And so there are some points as you go along, and but a large majority of the points are definitely at the end of the game.
See, and that's
So
sort of
it's a points tracker that's trying to compensate for something, basically. It could
Yeah,
just
basically.
be the edge of the board or chits.
Oh yeah.
Sorry,
well,
go
and
ahead, Wayne.
I say that's my complaint is you overspend to produce these poker chips that just get laid in the middle of the board and never get used again. They don't get moved around. They don't get stacked around. But the one thing you're going to use to track points, which is actually a part of the game, is something that you like. Spend less money on the poker chips and better money on the abacus, right? or
exactly.
Make them both equal.
And then I got to ask about the box. The one I'm seeing on BGG, it looks like holographic, and then also like physically parts of it are raised to make it look 3D. Is that a deluxe edition, or was Nick's copy like that?
That must be his had a little bit of the, I don't know, I'm not sure what the technology is called, where it's got kind of the little a couple of shiny parts on the box, but there was definitely no 3D. It really wasn't raised or anything. So that may be, if it's pronounced, that may be a different version of it, but I don't recall that being on his copy.
Okay. And the other thing I wanted to mention, you kind of, you were worried you would mispronounce the artist's name, and I'm not going to try to repeat it, but I just happened to click on it. And same artist for Rurik, Dawn of Kiev, Reavers of Midgard, and one of my all-time favorites, After the Empire. So I had to give a shout out to that. The art in this game looks really freaking cool. Like, I feel like it's straight out of a fantasy novel.
It is. The art's really nice. Even beyond, the box cover is really nice. I mean, that would make it stand out on the game shelf or at the game store for sure. But yeah, the cards are well done. It's really all it is. It's just cards, and then, like I say, you've got that little central board that has those poker chips. And just to clarify, you do pick up the chips, each of those 3 eras. You put them back in the bag, and you draw them out at the beginning of each of the 3. So there's a tiny reset every time. But as Wayne said, I mean, it's just because it's poker chips. It's just because it's cool. Which again kind of reminds me of maybe Splendor or something like that. I mean, Splendor, those poker chips could have been anything, but it's cool. Poker chips are poker chips. I like poker chips, so But
no, I don't mind them. It's just to have really cool poker chips, but then to have a foam abacus with like little chintzy plastic things that move around doesn't make sense.
Well, if anything, I would say that the components are a talking point. Like Nick talked about this on the show a few weeks ago, and to be honest, I would not have even realized it was the same game if I wouldn't have noticed that abacus. So it does its job.
Yeah, makes it memorable. Yeah.
I was ever since he talked about the abacus, I've been looking for a review of the game itself. So thanks for that.
There you go. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I guess I didn't give any kind of rating on it. I liked it. The BGG rating isn't particularly high on
Yeah, it was like a
BGG.
6 point something, I think.
Yeah,
I saw.
6.9. So it's
6.9.
almost a 7, which isn't horrible, but it's not. It definitely doesn't stand out. But it is a game that I think is a very beginner-friendly gateway type game. That kind of, again, I'd compare it in a way probably to like a Century Spice Road or something like that. That it's just got a couple of mechanics. There are some meaty decisions in it, but I enjoyed it. I definitely would play it again. But it is on the light side. They, like I said, advertises 20 to 60 minutes. We played our first game with a teach probably in 30 to 40, but you could get it in 20 minutes with 3 or 4 players probably if everybody knows what they're doing.
Cool. Thanks for that.
Yep.
For me, I wanted to chat about The Spill. It's a 2022 release designed by Andy Kim. The artist is Kwanchai Moriah from
Moria?
Smirk and Dagger.
Kwanchai
sure.
Moria.
That.
Yep.
Oh, sorry. Is that a common name that I should know?
That's a well-known Kwanchai
He's-
Moria.
he's
Oh,
done a
I'm
lot
looking
of
at
games.
Dinosaur Island. Okay, yeah.
Yep.
Well, I just showed my my noobness, I guess. But anyway, this is a game that I actually saw at Gen Con 2021, and I don't know if it was a pre-production copy, but I don't know, it just didn't grab me. And then whenever it started fulfilling and people started getting their copies, I'm looking at these pictures, I'm like, man, it does look really cool. So it's an oil spill, right? And you got to clean up an oil spill. This is BP, the board game, basically. It has what I like the most about it, and it's really eye-catching. It's got this like oil derrick in the middle, but it's a dice tower. And here's the thing: I like dice towers as much as the next guy, but they don't usually serve a purpose, right? It's just for fun, for rolling the dice. This actually has a purpose. So there are, I guess you could say, 4 quadrants of the board, and the only reason really for the quadrants is because each player is going to start in a different area. But what it does is it's more than that, because whichever quadrant the die lands in, that's the oil is spilling out that way. And so there are 6 sections within each quadrant. So if it's a 1, you put it on the 1, etc., etc. From that oil derrick going outward throughout the board, there are 3 sections. So basically, once 3 dice have gone on the same number in the same quadrant, it's full, right? And basically, you're just trying to get rid of the oil. You're trying to save the animals. It's a cooperative game. One thing I kind of don't like about it is that no matter what, you have to play with all 4 characters, which is fine if you're playing at 1, 2, or 4 players. But if you're playing at 3, you have to all kind of like collaboratively work on the last one, which I don't like sharing. But I know Carlos would hate this game because you can totally have somebody just call all the shots. You're all doing the same thing. Yeah, exactly. So every round you have what's called 4 AP, which I thought was funny. You know, whenever we hear AP, we're thinking analysis paralysis, but it's action points. I think they could have come up with a better name. And there are different basic actions that cost the same for every person. So you can spend 1 to move up to 2 sectors away, 1 AP to rescue an animal that's where you are. Now, if an animal has gotten oil on it, there are these animals that start on the board. If ever the oil gets on top of an animal, now it's got like oil all over it. So it costs an extra action point to rescue that animal because you got to like get the oil off of them as well. It also costs 1 point to push a die back, which means you're taking it off the board, but it's like you're just kind of pushing it back toward the oil derrick. And essentially what it means is it goes back in the bag and it's going to come out again. It's kind of like just pushing the problem off for the future. And you can spend 3 of your action points to remove an oil die completely. It doesn't go back in the bag. So the game is going to last until you run out of oil in the bag, or if you accomplish certain objectives that change from game to game. The cool things about it are that kind of make it a little bit more than just dice manipulation, is whenever there's oil on an animal, a die on an animal, if there is a die or oil still on the animal at the end of your turn, then that animal essentially dies. And if you ever have 3 of the same type of animal, it's in the sick bay, but I call it dead, or one of all 6 types of animals in the sick bay, then you lose. So that's kind of putting some pressure in a timer. There's some ways to get what's called, I don't know the terms for it, but like action cubes. If you ever get a set of rescued animals, or if you ever get rid of 3 dice, like completely off the board, then you get one of these cubes and you can put them on different actions. And kind of like in Space Base, so the better actions are going to have to charge up before you can use them. Some of them are single use. And then once you use that card, it goes away and a new action comes out. Now, it gives you a little bit of agency because you get 2 cards at the beginning of the game and every person chooses 1. But then throughout the game, those new actions are just flips. One other thing that's a little different that can end the game is if you have 6 areas that have a spill out. What that is basically if there's 3 dice in one section, it goes all the way to the edge of the board. There's a spill out and you have to clear that off before other ones happen, because if you have 6 at one time, then the game ends. And that's pretty much the game. It's fun. It was tough. We played on the easiest setting. and we lost. Jeremy had it was Jeremy's copy. He had played solo one time, and he had also lost. Really, the only differences in difficulty is one, what your in-game objectives are, and two, every time there's a spill out, how many dice you roll each turn goes up. And on the easy version, it's like it doesn't go up until like halfway through the game. There are also some asymmetric powers. There's some weather dice that can, I think they're called weather dice, that can make your actions cost more, or maybe let you not use certain actions. And one side of it also gives you like an extra action point, but there's only like 4 of them in the game, so they weren't a huge effect on the game. What else? Oh, one last thing. You can also choose to take extra actions, but whenever you do that, you're making the next player roll more oil dice, so it's like a give and take. But yeah, fun game. I would recommend it, but it's not for the faint of heart. It's easy to understand, but I'm still not sure how to master it.
So I think this is kind of timely you're talking about it today, because our podcast comes out on Sunday, but we're recording this on Wednesday, and actually the Dice Tower did their review today of this.
I saw that actually. Yeah,
it was pretty cool. Yeah,
I was already planning on talking about the spill.
Yes,
I'm not
we're not copycatting. We beat them to it. But no, I think their big observations was very pandemic like, but I also think it's very Flashpoint like. That you have to rescue, Flashpoint, you're rescuing people, you have to move your firefighters in and out, you have to control the fire, the spread of the fire. So it's very, it's that typical co-op game that's pandemic, it's Flashpoint, it's Endangered, where you're you have to control the board as long enough to meet your end goals to win the game. I'll say this, I like the idea of the theme. I'm a huge fan of Endangered as a cooperative game, because I think it's a game where Rob hates the term, where the theme is sort of teaching you a little bit about being more environmentally conscious a little bit, and how to that we need to save some of these animals, and so it's kind of cool. And the Dice Tower is a cool gimmick for the game.
Well, I got to ask, that was where I was going to go, is the derrick. So we got to talk about that a little bit. I know you kind of touched on it, but how functional is that really? I mean, is it really add to the game, or is it just a kind of a thing to look at?
Well, I think so, because it's not just telling you what number the die is on; it's also directing the dice around the board. Because there's 4 6s on the board, for example. If I was just rolling dice and I would just randomly put them out, but this says, oh no, this is going to this specific spot.
It randomizes the game where it's you don't have to worry about shuffling a deck of cards. You're just throwing the dice in, and you're always going to get a different zone or a different number. So it's a double optimization.
Yeah. I guess.
Now I will say, sometimes if you roll it too hard, they do kind of fly, because the way it works is that they go through like 2 holes, and the bottom one is kind of almost like a pyramid to direct it to 4 different ways. And if it hits that point just the right way, sometimes it bounces out, but that didn't happen that much. It's fun. Like, I enjoy, it's my turn, I get to drop them in the derrick. It was something I was looking forward to. And I see what you're saying, Wayne. I could see why they could see it as kind of pandemic-ish, because it's like, do I go over here and do this? But then if I do that, oh no, something might happen over here. But it's in such a unique and different way that it didn't feel like that. Now that I'm looking back and thinking about it, I can see that, but it didn't feel like that in the moment.
Just from your explanation, to me, it seems like a decent combination of Flashpoint, Fire Rescue, and Pandemic. Which a lot of those cooperative games are going to borrow from that sort of genre. This could be a good entry point for somebody to that genre, right? Of sort of cooperative, rescue, save the board type thing.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, let's face it, 99% of games nowadays are not going to have anything or everything that's brand new. Most of what we're going to see in games has happened already, I believe. So I'm not going to fault a game for having similar mechanics to other games.
Yeah, I was going to say, and if you're going to compare it to games, I mean, those 2 games, Flashpoint and Pandemic, Carlos and I have talked several times about why don't we play Flashpoint more often. I own a copy of it. I don't have all the expansion stuff, because I know they've had several expansion boards and things, and added new mechanics and different stuff like that. But even just the base game of Flashpoint, I played it a handful of times, and that's a game that every time I play it, I'm like, man, I should be playing this game more often. It's a great game. So so compared it to those kinds of games is definitely warranted. And I know, again, we don't put a whole lot on the complexity and the weight ratings on BGG, but I do see it's rated just as a 2.0. So I mean, I'd have to pull up the other 2 to see what they're rated, but I think that would have to be a little lighter than the other 2. So I mean, again, maybe a really good gateway type game here to bringing people into the hobby, and with that cool oil derrick and all that kind of stuff. Do you think, Mitchell, it's a game that you'd want to teach a newbie?
So mechanically, yes, but strategy wise, like I said, it is tough. Like, I would worry that it might turn people off to the hobby if they're like, man, are all the games going to be like this? I mean, you look at the box. I like this about games. You look at a box, you're like, oh, it's a cute turtle on it. I'm going to go and just chill. And then you get to the game, it's like, oh my gosh, this is intense. So, I mean, I think it's a good simulation of what you might actually be dealing with if you're in this situation of being, BP and you're trying to clean it up. It was, I don't want to say it was stressful, but it definitely wasn't easy on decision making, because it's like basically a lot of times what was happening is that there would be oil on this animal, and it's like, okay, do I need to spend my whole turn to get way across the board to save this one animal from dying, or should I work on where my boat is right now? And I think what our problem was, we were too afraid to let animals die, and so we were always going across the board and not doing as much with our turn as we could have done, more for we were worrying too much about the immediate rather than the long-term consequences.
Sick bay. We don't want to turn off the animal rights.
I'm sorry.
I tell you what, the art is phenomenal on this game, and
I agree.
Quantai Moria. I mean, you look at the list of games this guy's done; it's phenomenal. He's really a top artist. So, I mean, it's definitely. So, I mean, I gave my rating for my game of try before you buy or buy. Robin, Mitchell, where are you guys on your games?
Well, go ahead, Mitchell, since you just did the spill. Go ahead.
Sure. I would say try before you buy, only because of the difficulty in winning. I enjoyed it. I would want to play it again, but I wouldn't want somebody who doesn't like tougher cooperative games to go out and buy it and then be disappointed if they struggle to win.
And with Arcana Rising, I think I would say if you can get it at a good price, I would say it's a buy. Again, I think it's a game that's it's got enough to it that I would play it definitely multiple times. And again, it's a game that I think I would pull out to fairly new players, borderline gateway non-gamers. It's a game that the mechanics are easy enough to pick up and play, I guess, similar to the spill, that you can pretty much teach it to anybody. And then if you want to get a little deeper into it, there's a little depth there that after we played it, we kind of all wanted to reset it and play it again. So I think it would be a buy.
All right, so that wraps up our what we've been playing. We'll go ahead and move on to our strategy tips section, which we're going to try out these cheesy names and see if it works for consistency. I think we settled on maybe on dice advice for that. We'll see if it sticks. You guys let us know. But this week, we figured it was timely. We're in the midst of the Beans and Dice tournament on BGA for Castles of Burgundy, so we're going to give some strategy tips on that. Rob, I know you're in the other half of the tournament, I believe, and we're still waiting for that half to finish. Me and Wayne were in the second half. Give us a quick update, because you're mid-game right now. Me and Wayne are already done with our half for right now. How's it going?
Yeah. We just started in my particular game on my side of the bracket. We just started the third, I don't know what they call them, eras, ages again of ours. So we are still in the first half of the game. It's going pretty well. I know now at this point that I've got to probably pull off a first or a second place finish in my last game. I am in third, close to second, but Getty in our group has quite a lead. And so we'll see how that goes. This tends to be a game that you can get a lot of points at the end. And so I know we've kind of all commented on that a lot, that as you approach the end, you may be feeling pretty good. And then all of a sudden, when we're playing on BGA, Board Game Arena, when it does that final scoring, it's like, bam, somebody jumps out of nowhere. So it just kind of depends on how you play the game. And I guess we're going to get into the strategy here on playing a little bit, but on what I guess our personal preferences are, or how we think we score well in that game.
Yeah, well, since you have the floor, why don't you go ahead and lead off, Rob? How do you approach the strategy whenever you're playing a game of board game of Castles of Burgundy?
Castles of Burgundy, yeah. For me, definitely, it's about action economy, about getting more out of the tiles. I'm not so much into trying to necessarily complete different areas, and I'm going to, I guess, assume that everybody's got a certain level of familiarity with Castles of Burgundy. But just to touch on it, you get points. Decreasing points as the game goes along for filling up certain areas of your board with different types of buildings or ships or whatever. And so I think definitely early in the game, if there's an opportunity to complete an area really easy, just a size 1 or a size 2, where in the first round or two where you get slightly more points, I think the points decrease by 2 points for completing an area from round to round to round through the different, I think it's 6 rounds of the game. So it's not a huge difference. I know y'all are calculating there. Is it 6, 5, 6?
It's 5 and 5. Yeah.
Is it 5? Okay, so 5 of 5. So in the 5 rounds of the game, it goes down by 2 each, 2 2 points, whether you do it in the first or the second or the third, it decreases. But I don't find the 2 points to be too penalizing. But like I say, if it's obvious, I think if you can complete one earlier, you try to do that. But as far as my strategy, I really am big on the yellow tiles and the buildings. I don't know what they call the yellow tiles. I'm sure there's a name for it.
Knowledge tiles.
Knowledge tiles. Okay, there you go. So the knowledge tiles. And so the knowledge tiles allow you to bend or break the rules of the game. And there are definitely some particular tiles in the game and that yellow sections that are strong, that if you can get those early in the game, you can build to certain strategies. This game that I'm in currently, one that came up pretty early that I was able to jump on, that I believe is pretty powerful, is that whenever I'm using a die to take a tile off of the main board, I can adjust the number up or down by 1. And that really saves me in having to burn dice later in the game to make them into workers, so that I have that flexibility if I need to grab a particular tile to complete an area. Being able to make a 2 into a 3 or a 1 every single time I need to go grab a tile off that main board is really powerful, I think, and really important. Without kind of going through all the yellow tiles again, there are definitely some that give you advantages either in placing or in taking things that multiply and get better, or if you can get them early and use them through the full game, they can be really helpful. But I really am a big fan of the buildings, and there are different types of buildings in the game, these 6 or 7 different types, and they all allow you to do something different. And so any tile that I can place, any building that I can place that will give me another action, like I guess the most obvious example would be the castles, or the I think it's castles in the building, the dark green tiles. Anytime you place those, it allows you to take another action as if you had a dice of any number. So that's extremely powerful. That can let me place another tile off of my my reserve board onto my duchy. It can allow me to go back to the main board and grab any tile off of that main board, except for the middle section where you have to pay the gold or the silver coins to take those tiles. But that's really important. The other one I believe is called the Colosseum, that I'm a big fan of. And the Colosseum tiles, buildings, that anytime you place those on your board, it allows you to place another tile that you have in your reserve section on your personal player board for a free action out onto into your duchy. And so this particular game that I'm in, again, I don't want to give away all my strategies, we're still mid-tournament here, but this particular game we're in, I was able to grab in the first round 3 of those Colosseums actually popped up, and so I was able to grab all 3 of those in the first 3 or 4 rounds of the game. And so I had them kind of sitting in my storage. I grabbed one, then I would take an action to grab another tile that I wanted to place, and then put those on. And then this very last turn that I actually just took a little earlier today, I had a castle and I had a Colosseum in my reserve, and then I had a third tile, I believe it was an animal tile, and that allowed me to place the castle, which allowed me to take any other action that I wanted, which was then to place the Colosseum, and then I could place anyone in my reserve. So then I was able to place the animal. I think it was 4 cow tile that I was able to place out. So for spending 1 die, I was basically able to take 3 actions. And so again, that's my big thing, of where I can find those synergies, where I can find something that will allow me to spend 1 die to take maybe 2 or 3 actions and chain some things together. It obviously doesn't always work. This is a die-based game, a dice-based game. I'm pretty outspoken on dice hate me, so that's always a part of it. I know my first game at the tournament, I rolled doubles, I think 4 times in that game, and I ended up finishing 3rd in that game just because, the dice didn't break my way. The tiles weren't there that I needed. If I needed a tile in the 1 slot, I would roll double 4s, and it was just like, yeah, that's the way that breaks sometimes. But again, without taking the whole show, I'm sure I probably stole some people's thunder there, but that's a lot of what I look for when I'm playing Castles of Burgundy. But I guess let me go ahead and pass that around here. Wayne, what do you look for? What's your insider tips here?
So before we jump to Wayne, I think we need to clarify, people that aren't listening, just a quick elevator pitch of the game. So you're trying to fill terrain on a board of different colors, and you're limited to your dice. So you get 2 dice every round. Whatever the number is, you can choose a tile that matches that number, and then you may also place tiles that match that number. Obviously, there are other rules, like you can discard a die to get 2 workers, which will allow you to manipulate the dice numbers. But in case you don't know, that's what we're talking about. Go ahead, Wayne.
Yeah, it's kind of this is probably one of my top two or three games of all time. So I played a decent chunk of
Wow.
it. And I would say that, the basic statement, yeah, you want to try to get as many actions as you can, right? Because you roll 2 dice every turn. That's 2 actions. But if you can find other ways to get additional actions by playing certain tiles, which give you free picks, which give you, playing a boat, which lets you take a trade good, or playing some market that lets you sell the trade goods, playing the castles, which lets you pull a thing. So you always want to look for those additional actions anywhere you can, and play those off. And one of the big ones is the silverlings. You can, if you're, when you play your starting board, you kind of look at where you're going to place your initial castle tile. That sort of tells you what you're going to be going for first, depending on what board you have, because the boards all have different sort of groupings of the colorings of the land areas. So I kind of like to really study the board for a couple of minutes, looking at, okay, well, I think what I'm going to try to do is start with knowledge tiles this time, or we're going to try to start with buildings this time, because it's wherever I look for the first round or two, where can I finish a couple of quick areas to get a couple of quick points, but to start then building for the future rounds of what multiple actions I can build for at a time. So I do try to get the silverlings as quickly as possible, at least 1 or 2 of them. So you're getting two additional every round. That gives you a bunch of extra free buys for the rest of the game. And that tends to be, especially in the games that we played on our side, Mitchell, and people rush for those silver mines.
Those mines, yeah, they were a hot commodity.
The game I finished 4th in the second game, and I was the 4th player to go, and all the mines were gone, and all of the rivers or lakes or boats or whatever, they were all gone right away as well. So those are some things I like to think about, is how do you maximize your turns? And then a couple of things I'd start thinking about is you have to be flexible as what gets put on the board, because the tiles refill every start of the new round, and you never know where things are going to be placed. So I try to look for sort of if-thens. And so one of the examples I give is I typically don't start trying to do animals the first couple of turns, because what I want to do is I want to see what scoring tile comes out for animals, because there's a scoring tile for having the most of one kind of animal, right? Or having all of one kind of animal. And there's a scoring tile that gives you bonuses based upon having different kinds of animals. So I kind of try to leave my animal area open until I get to see one of those and grab one, right? And then, okay, now I know that I need different kinds of animals, where I want to just get all the same kind of animal. Because if you do all the same kind of animal, you can build a lot of extra points. But so I kind of look at that, where I look at, what specifically too is like when I'm looking at buildings, do I want to, I want to go for the worker building or the coin building, the ones that give me the ability to get additional actions. But then as the game progresses, I look for that first scoring tile to come out, and I try to grab it, or try to grab a scoring tile that then drives me to get certain types of buildings in the later parts of the game. So that's sort of what you want to do is, in the first couple of rounds, you want to be flexible. You want to pick and choose what's available. Take your best actions, look for some additional options to take additional turns. And then about midpoint of the game is when you want to start narrowing into, what do I need to then finish out my engines, finish out my areas. And then I don't, you guys can say to what I typically try to do is, some people go out and grab a boat right away, or 2 boats right away to move ahead. So you get to go first. If you move up the blue track, I don't actually ever like to be the first one out the gate there, because if you're the first one out the gate, yeah, you get to go first for a couple of turns. But as someone else builds boats and they go on top of you, they get ahead of you. So you never want to be the one to get to the end of the track unless you crank that out real quick and you're at the end of the track and everyone's 3-4 away from you. Then it'll be a while before they catch you. But I never really want to be the first one to lay the boat. I usually like to be like the second or third person to lay a boat down, so that I could, get first turn in the middle point of the game, where those selections where you're turning the corner mean the most.
If you're going to do the boat thing, you got to stay a couple steps ahead of everybody, because I think a lot of people forget about that if you go first and you move ahead first, that stacking mechanism there is really cool, that if somebody does it after you, they actually stack on top of you, and then they go before you in the turn order.
I agree with Wayne. The middle of the game is the most important. A lot of games, the end of the game is important, right? But especially in this tournament, I've realized the last couple turns, if I'm going to lose, it's probably not going to change in the last couple rounds. Same if I'm going to win. It's those decisions you make mid-game. And so my strategy for this game has changed a lot as I've played it more. In the early days, I was always going for completing as many regions as possible, as early as possible, because you get more points whenever you do that earlier in the game. But like Rob said earlier, it's just 2 points extra per round, which is not that much. What's more important, I've realized, is completing your big ones because they compound. So, an area of 3, for example, that's worth 6 points because the first tile is worth 1, then 2, then 3, it goes up. So an area of 6 is what, like 21? That's way more important. But what I started trying to do was, rather than trying to optimize and finish regions, I tried a couple games with actually 50-50 success where, if possible, I would not use any workers. I would use every die for what it was. So if I get a 5 and a 4, I'm going to buy whatever 5 there is and play whatever 4 there is. Just getting as many tiles as I could on the board. One time I did that and it worked great. I think I won. The other time I did it, I think I came in dead last. So that's going to be situational. But yeah, what I've realized, I think the true key to victory is what Rob was saying, was those knowledge tiles, those in-game points. Because I think in almost every game of the tournament, I was either first or almost first whenever the game ended. But I only came in first one time overall, because those in-game points can give you so many points, multipliers for so many different things. That obviously it's situational, but that I think is the key, is getting those in-game victory point multipliers.
And I think that's where I talk about the mid-game being important, because that's when you want to start grabbing some of those point things. That's where you grab the animal tile that you're going to try to score on. That's when you're going to grab, okay, I'm midpoint of the game, and oh, hey, there's the workshop bonus points. Let me count how many workshops I got already. I don't have any workshops. Okay, I'm not going to grab that one. But oh, there's the cathedral bonus points. I've already got 2 cathedrals. Well, let me grab that one. And now the rest of the game, I'm going to be looking for more cathedrals. And that's where I think people forget, is you have to, that the mid game is where you narrow your scope of what you're looking for. And that's where you want to save up those additional actions like Rob was talking about, where you save up your silverlings or save up your workers so you can mitigate dice to go grab the tiles you really want. In the beginning of the game, you just want to get whatever's available, start filling things out, start, building a diverse sort of, landscape, and then midpoint, narrow it down. Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, and again, I was going to just touch on there that this game that I'm currently in right now, that I'm currently playing, I took a bit of a risk. I mentioned that I really like those Colosseums, so I jumped on those 3 Colosseums, and I got a 4th one in the second era, the second age of the game. So I had 4 of them. I had 4 different building areas of my board. You can't, for those that don't know, you can't double up on the same type of building normally in one area without, there is a special yellow tile, a knowledge tile, that allows you to break that rule. But if you don't have that tile, then normally it's just 1 per area. So I've got those 4, and I knew the rest of the game I was going to need to watch out for the yellow knowledge tile that then at the end of the game gives you 4 points for every one of those that you have. And I actually at the end of the second era, the end of the second age of the game, it had not yet come out, and I looked around at other players' boards because I wanted to get an idea that if that tile came out, how fiercely was I going to have to try to jump on that, either by spending workers or doing whatever I needed to do, anything to get that tile. By looking around the rest of the people's boards, only one other player, we're at a 4-player game, only one other player had 1 Colosseum, probably because I had vacuumed them all up. But it actually came out in the third age, the third era, and I didn't have the right dice to get it on my first shot, and I only had 1 worker. I couldn't even modify to get it, so I had to wait till the second round. I luckily felt pretty confident that it would be there, and it was. I was able to grab it this last turn and get that on my board. So there, is a little bit of risk in that. I mean, if one of my opponents had seen the fact that I was putting all those Colosseums out, and then they saw that knowledge tile pop up, again, I would say something that's much easier to see when you're playing probably in person than when you're playing online on BGA. And that's one thing playing online that I'm not crazy about, is I can't study and watch. Well, I guess you can, if you want to replay, that has that replay function, you can go back and see what people have done each round. But when you're actually sitting in the same room with people and you're kind of watching what they're doing, and you're able to see the game play out, those types of things become more obvious. But it was kind of lucky for me that it came out. I had 2 shots at it, and I got to wait till the second try to get it.
And that's something I think you need to, it's sort of a second order thinking. Because you can play this game, and you just, if you're first time playing it or first 10 times playing it, you really just concentrate on your board and just trying to figure it out, like all the mechanics and learning all the different buildings.
Yeah.
But later on in your plays, even on BGA, like if I see a scoring tile and I go, oh, it's the Colosseum scoring tile, And let me see how many Coliseums I have. I have none. Where are all they at? Look at the other boards. Oh,
Rob's got them all.
Rob's got 4 of them. Oh, and he
Yeah.
rolled a 4, and he's going to pick that next. And
Yeah.
maybe I grab it, even though it's not going to give me points. But if it helps me complete a knowledge area,
Yeah.
that I'm not going to be able to fill anyway. Like you have to fill those areas. So it may not give you end game scoring, but by not letting Rob get 16 free points, because that's a huge amount. That you kind of have to look at some of those scoring ones, and I think that's where what's funny is I hadn't played Castles of Burgundy in several years, just pandemic, and then it's a heavier game to get out during some game days where you have a lot of people that aren't into those kind of games. First few times playing on BGA, I totally forgot about the end game scoring and keeping getting those tiles, and you get back into it. So it's really pretty cool.
Yeah, I got to touch real quick also just on the animal scoring area. For better or for worse, whether it's a good strategy or not, I tend to almost completely ignore that unless it slaps me in the face. In my second round game, in my first round game, I put down maybe 2 animals the whole game. In my second round game, there was an opportunity late in the game where I think it was either a 3 or 4 animal area that was there, and there happened to just be a ton of, I think it was sheep. There were like 2 4 sheep tiles, and then like a 3, and then there might have even been another 3 in the middle. And I was able to grab all those. And then for those that don't know, if you place the same type of animal in the same area, let's say I put down a 3 sheep tile, I get 3 points for placing it. Then if the next round or a later round in that same area of my board, I get a 4 sheep area, and I place that same type of animal in there, I get the 4 points that I get for placing that 4 sheep tile. But then I add any similar animals in that same area, so I get another 3 points for the 3-point sheep that I put down originally. So I get 7 points for playing that second one. If I can play a third one and a fourth one, then again I get to score each of those other tiles if they're the same type of animal. I believe the game's got, is it 4 different types? There's goats, there's sheeps, there's pigs, cows. So I think it's those 4 types of animals that everybody's kind of competing for. But that's another thing. I mean, it can smack you in the face. And I mean, if there's a bunch of sheep tiles sitting out there and nobody's grabbing them, in that game I got lucky because it was, like I say, it was late in the game. Most people had already gotten their animal strategy going, and they had either placed most of their animals or they were looking for a particular type of animal. Nobody had gone sheep, and then they just all came out at the end. And it was like, oh, it just fell in my lap.
I was saying, think about it. If you have a 4 animal area and you get 2 3s and 2 4s, it's 3 and then 6 and then 10 and then 14, so 24, 30. That's 36 points from the animals. Plus you complete that area, which is 4, which is then 1 2 3, which is another 10 points. It's a 50-point area if you put it with all the same. So animals can be very powerful, but I even I agree, Rob. I generally ignore the animals till later in the game. If I get one of those special animal scoring things, that's when I typically switch to getting animals.
Yeah. How do you feel about the animals, Mitchell?
Yeah, it's very situational. It depends on. Usually, what happens is I'll start grabbing animals if I need them to fill up some small regions just for some points, but then if I do that so many times that I'm close to getting one of those bonus tiles for placing all my animals, I'll go full out on that. Or, of course, situationally, if I see there's a bunch of sheep out there that nobody's going for, it's like, I might as well scoop these up, But yeah, it's usually not my priority, not my first strategy in the game for whatever reason. I feel like we're all on board in agreement on that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I definitely have seen in both rounds that I've played before, the first 2 games I played, there were definitely people in each of my games that went animals early. And I was like, okay, I'm just not going to do animals. It's not my favorite thing anyway. So I can't report to you. I don't remember if those people did well or didn't do well. But yeah, for whatever reason, for me, it's just something that kind of falls. And if it falls in my lap, it falls in my lap. But I don't really go looking for them.
Those are our thoughts on Castles and Burgundy strategy. Let us know if they help you or if they don't. Come and get mad at us as well. So we're going to go ahead and move on to our main course. And tonight we are going to be ranking the base factions of Scythe. For those of you listening, if you're not sure what Scythe is, it's a game designed by Jamie Stegmaier, Stonemaier Games. I believe it was a 2016 release. It's an alternate history of post-World War I, where the war had been fueled by this factory city-state that was pumping out these mechs, and now all the different factions from World War I are going and trying to converge on controlling the factory. It's hard to pin down exactly what this game is. There's definitely some area control. There's some resource gathering, some combat, and basically the in-game scoring is based on a multiplier. How popular you are means your modifier is going to go up, and it's going to multiply your achievements, which you can get up to 6 of them, your territories you control, and the resources you have. And so there are 5 factions in the base game of Scythe, all asymmetric power. So we're going to go through those one by one and kind of give our rankings. And maybe before we get into that, I know Wayne's probably chomping at the bit. He played Scythe in person a while back, but in preparation for this week, we've been playing some online games with Scythe. And I'll just give you the floor, Wayne, to say
just let him say his piece here. Yeah.
No, it's all good. I'm going to temper myself. I don't want to be the angry old man all the time, right? Is that what it is? But no, I think Mitchell is probably going to talk very highly of the game. He really likes it. It's probably what you'll say. It's probably in your top games of all time. I think Rob, you probably really like the game, but it's not like you're amazing. You're not.
It's not top 10, but it's second tier. Yeah,
second tier. For me, it's further down than that. And I, I've got 12 plays of it in now at this point. But granted, most of them have been the online implementation. So. Even taking out some of the frustrations of some of the user interfaces, little glitches here and there, I think my issue with this game is it's like orange juice concentrate, right? So and what I'll say is,
I love his analogies.
I know you love
He's got these analogies. Yeah,
I love the analogies. Well, I changed it up. When you think about it, so this game is just always. It's like the last squeeze of an orange. You're only ever going to get a little bit of resources, and so I generally like games where, either you're ramping up and you're getting more and more and more. And at the end of the game, you've got the fresh squeeze stuff and you're good to go. And or you at the beginning of the game, you get a ton of resources and you have to manage them as an ever shrinking supply. Like Scythe is just from start to finish. You're just like, please God, give me one more thing, and it's like,
but just put out all 8 of your workers, man.
It's tight.
Right. And then you can't. It's tight, but it's tight. But then it's also like you only get 4 choices every turn, basically. So you click one button, and in the next round you click one of 3 choices because you can't re-click the same one unless you play a certain faction. But the game is good. I'm tempered a little bit from my first few plays, over the last week.
Oh, we heard those. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was just frustrating. But it is.
Please don't.
No, I get it. I like the game. I think that I don't even. It goes back to my whole sort. I think part of my problem in the game is playing it now to 2020 as opposed to 2016 when this game first came out. It was a different board game world. I think that there's a lot of other games that do similar stuff or do things like this that are more entertaining, maybe, but. And part of it just deals with my issues with the whole BGG ranking system where, I don't see this as a top 10, or what is it ranked now? 15th or 16th overall. I don't see this as the 16th most the greatest board game of all time. And I think almost the production is gorgeous. It's a typical Stonemaier game. It's amazing in person. It's even crazier looking. But I think part of that is a distraction for what you get in that box and everything that's there. I would expect more game than that was there. And I don't know. We'll talk more as we go. But yeah, Rob,
let me say that this game is definitely a puzzle. And as I started thinking about your disliking of it, I am outspoken about it. I do not like puzzle games. I don't like games where you're trying to slide the right thing in the right spot. This one I like, and it's absolutely a puzzle. I mean, it's all about. It's tight. The resources are tight. The maximizing again action efficiency in this is extremely important. I know we talked a little bit about when we were doing our online play recently about the ways you need to look at it. And you have these top actions and these bottom actions, and the top action you can pretty much always do, but the bottom action, you have to spend a certain number of a different type of resource. The game varies depending on what they call economic board you receive, different layouts, and give you different requirements for different amounts of different resources that you have to spend to do a thing on the bottom. And the game is a puzzle about trying to do as many bottom actions as you can throughout the game. And I'd say I've played this live in person probably 20 to 25 times on a board. I've played it digitally probably about 10 times. And I would say a large majority of the time, 75, 80% of the time, the person who wins or the people who do well in the game that finish near the top are the ones who get more bottom actions. They play that resource game right, where they collect the right things at the right time to be able to allow them, even if the top action isn't the best thing they can do at that moment, being able to do that second bonus action, which is a lot of times equally as important as that top action, but being able to multiply the amount of times they can do that is really important. And it's kind of stringing those decisions together, doing that puzzle. I've had games where I don't do bottom actions very often, and those games feel crummy. I mean, I come out of that thinking, man, what did I screw up in this game? And I find myself thinking about it afterwards in my prior plays about how did I not maximize that? How did I get into a position where I was always chasing that extra resource and I couldn't do the bottom actions that I wanted to do? Or if I did, it felt like I was taking 2 turns or 3 turns that I was wasting to get that one extra food so that I could then do the bottom action. That would be that one time every now and then that yes, I did a good top action. I strung it with a good bottom action, and that little bit felt good. I've had games of this where it feels like 80% of the time I'm not even having to try. And it's like, I'm just, okay, I'm obviously going to do that. Oh, and that gives me the extra food I need. Now I'm going to go over and do that, which I wanted to do next anyway. And now I can cash that food in and I can do it in a list action. I've had games, like I said, where it just falls away. That puzzle is just, it almost just happens automatically. And I know, again, the detraction on that, you might say, well, if somebody who's played the game 30 times has those feelings, then is it just luck? I mean, you get the right starting spot, you get the right board, you get the right faction, and it combos up. And maybe sometimes it is. I know that there are rankings all over when you look online, and we'll talk about this a little bit here in just a minute about strategies and our favorites and stuff like that. But the rankings, in a little bit of research that I did, I knew this a little beforehand because I've played the game for years now, but even though it's not a whole lot of times, but I played it, first time I played it was probably 5 or 6 years ago. But there are rankings that if you have this faction, but this economy board, because they're completely random, you get a faction, a random faction, and a random economy board. Normally, you can play variations of the game, but if you get this faction with this economy board, you're going to have an uphill battle the whole time. But at that same faction, if you get a different economy board that kind of synergizes with the starting area of that faction and with what that faction likes to do, then it goes from a CD rating to an AB rating just because of the combination you can get. So that could be a plus and a minus, but
that's a minus for me. Like, because I think part of it is several of the first games I played, I was like that. I was with a faction where you don't get a certain starting area, and then the board just didn't mesh up right. And I think that, it's even to the point that there's certain boards and combinations that are technically like illegal in like banned. Organized play. So I think that detracts from a game. That tells me that there's some issues with the game function that, if I would like to play that game where it's not as random, where you say, okay, let's all pick the board that's not the best for your faction, or pick the best board for your faction and play, so that you're on equal footing. Because if there's one player that has the perfect combination of their faction and their board, and everyone else has got the D rating board, then how are you going to, it's a lot hard. You probably could win if you're better, a little bit better at it, but it's way harder, right?
Yeah, with the modular board expansion, I believe there was a variant that said, like, hey, if you guys want to like draft and pick factions and match, you can do that. And plenty of people house rule that. Yeah, on the digital implementation, there's even an option to do that.
Yep.
So yeah, let's get into the factions. Wayne, I really like the website you shared with us. It was victoryconditions.com. It has a very good explanation of the differences between the factions. That I was going to go and type all this up, but it's already here. So I'll just go in the order that they have it here, starting with the Nords. So I don't think, in my opinion, we need to get into the nitty gritty of what the starting resources are, but I do think what's really important is the faction special ability and their mech abilities. So the Nords, their workers can swim across rivers. If you guys don't know, the workers are the ones who like build mechs and collect resources and build buildings, and usually no units naturally can cross water. And with all the base factions, you start on a peninsula, so you have to find some way to get out. Riverwalk, all of the factions have the ability to cross rivers in certain territories, and they all have the ability to add movement called speed. But I want to look at the 2 asymmetric mechs on each faction as well. So the Nords also have Seaworthy. Their character and mechs can move onto lakes. so they don't have to get that ability to cross rivers, and they can also retreat onto lakes whenever they lose in combat. And then also, they can pay 1 power before combat for the opponent to lose 2 combat. I guess since I have the floor, I'll just talk about the Nords real quick. Spoiler alert, I rate these as my last in terms of what I think is the best faction. Your workers being able to cross rivers, I do not think is that big of a deal at all, because workers, unless they're aided by a mech, can only ever move 1 space at a time. So even though they have that extra mobility, they're limited by their how far they can go. All I have to do is churn out a single mech with Riverwalk or build a tunnel, which will let me teleport to a mine, and now their ability is null and void. Any other faction can do that. The only difference is the Nords get to do it a turn or 2 earlier. Paying 1 combat for the opponent, 1 power for the opponent to lose 2 power is extremely situational, and it's like only in a situation where there's a difference of 1 power will that ever really matter in combat. I do like being able to move onto lakes, but there's another faction that you can move onto lakes that I prefer. That's my hot take on the Nords.
So I think I like the Nords, and I think the that ability to move the workers across rivers is pretty powerful in the first 5 or 6 turns. You know, like, yes, later in the game when everyone's built all their mechs, you've built your mechs, you don't need that ability anymore. But there's a lot of abilities in the game that become kind of not necessary as the game goes on. But I think, you know, your starting area, in any one unit starting area, you have access to 3 supplies, right? Or 3. And then you have to take the trade action to get the ones that you're missing, basically, until you've built a mech with Riverwalk, and then you can break out of your starting area. But the Nords can break out of their starting area turn 1. You know, you can move right away and then produce, and you know, then you have 4 of the 5 potential areas of resources. So that makes your producibility better right from the beginning, because you have access to produce all of the resources from the beginning. And I think
the caveat to that, is that they're the only faction that start without a village in their peninsula. So in order to make more workers, you have to venture outside of your peninsula, so even though you can venture out earlier on, I feel like it's going to just take you longer, because you venture out, you repopulate, and then you have to come back in to do it. It's like it takes several turns to do that. But that was just my caveat. Continue.
Yeah, and I think, you know, retreating to the river, or retreating to a lake when you lose combat, right? That's pretty powerful, because if you lose your combat, you have to go all the way back to your starting area, and then you have to move back out. So depending on where that battle is, if it's close to your base, doesn't really matter. But if you've ventured out, you know, if you're in the middle of the board or on the other side of the board, you can pop back, and then for next turn, you're able to move right back into the area you wanted to go to anyway.
That is a good point. I didn't think of that.
Yeah. It's saving movement. That movement of having to move your mech back out from your starting area all the way to where you wanted to go, or where you lost that battle, that could cost you some pretty decent amount of time trying to get that movement back.
Where do you rank the Nords of the 5, Wayne?
I had them in the middle. It's funny, is I have a definitive 1 and 5, and then I have kind of 3 in the middle, and so Nords, I kind of have them at like 3rd or 4th.
Not my favorite, not my least favorite. I'm going to start with, I guess, my ranking, which is I'd put them somewhere in the middle as well, probably bottom middle. I do need to preface my whole rest of the discussion here, and I'm not trying to undermine what we're doing here, but I'm going to say, you know, I'm willing to certainly to go through and rank each of these, but and I will. But in doing research for this, again, I've got, like I say, about 30 plays of this under my belt. But in doing research and looking at what the real gurus online, people who played this game hundreds or in some cases even thousands of times, the one thing I saw that kind of popped up a lot, and I didn't think much of before we did this and before I started researching it, is that each of these factions depends a lot on the number of players in the game. And there are factions that are particularly strong with only 1 or 2 or 2 or 3 players on this big board, and there are certain ones that stink with that number of players. The ones that are war heavy, the Rusviets, I saw that came up. That's by a lot of people have them rated as the best faction in the game, but they tend to be powerful when they can throw their muscle around a little bit, when they can dominate people, when they can block territories, when they can get a lot of direct conflict. They're not as good at the economic game. Their one big advantage we'll get to later is a huge advantage, but the The Nords tend to do better in lower player count games where they can really focus on just the economy. They can spread out. That's their biggest advantage, is that the fact that they can spread out and they can walk with even with their workers just anywhere they want. They don't have to rely on either leaders or mechs or anything to help get them around the board. They can just, especially late in the game when you're trying to just get those territory bonuses, they can just, if they produce a lot of workers late in the game, spread out, cover a lot of territory, they can get that multiplier and that bonus really well done. I do agree with Wayne that I do like them a lot early game. They're fun to play early game. The fact that I can go out and just spread out and get some resources where everybody else is usually limited to just 2 resources plus their get an extra worker action when they produce. The Nords can spread out, and if my economic board tells me I need to have food or some other resource that's not in my starting area, no problem. I just take a move action or 2 and I can pretty much beat any type of resource tile in the board in the game, and I can go get what I need pretty much anytime I want. Something else to touch on that I like about the Nordic faction is you may recall that anytime when most of the factions, I should say, do combat in the game, I think there's one that breaks this rule with a mech. But if they're doing combat in a space where a worker is present, they lose a popularity. Actually, for every worker in that area, when they go in and initiate the combat, they lose a popularity, which is an in-game multiplier for having to expel or kick workers out of an area where combat is done. And so one thing that's kind of fun with the Nords, and again, it may not be the best for getting points and for game strategy necessarily, but is blocking certain positions. If I know that there's a spot that my opponent's trying to get to, maybe with their leader, one of the event spots, and I have some eyes on maybe getting to that spot a little later, but I'm not ready, and I see somebody moving towards there, maybe I throw a worker over on that spot just to see, is it really worth it for you to go ahead and lose a popularity just because you want to pop that event? So it gives other factions something to think about. I do agree that they are on the weaker side. I say I agree. I guess I agree with Mitchell. The research I did, almost every list I looked at from the gurus, they have the Nords listed as the weakest, the worst faction in the game. So the people who have played this a lot don't like them. I have fun playing them, but I can see where they have some weaknesses. Early in the game, they're great. But as you get into the meat of the game, when you get into building mechs and special abilities from the mechs and those kinds of things, they do take a bit of a nosedive. So I like playing them, but I don't think they're the strongest. They're not my least favorite just because I enjoy them. I don't think I'd put them at the bottom of the pack. So we'll get to that in a minute. But I'd put them maybe one step up.
All right. So that's the Nords. Moving along in this list, we have the Rusviets next, which for me are going to be the complete opposite. So the Rusviets, their special ability is really important. So inside, you start off with 4 actions you can choose, and from turn to turn, you have to switch which action you're doing. You can't do them back to back unless you're from Russia. You can do the same one back to back. Also, their mech abilities. They let them teleport from any village they control to the middle space, the factory, which gives you a 5th action and also counts as extra spaces at the end of the game. And they also have People's Army, which if they have at least 1 worker with them, they get to play an extra combat card in battle, which usually every military unit you have, your mech, your character, contribute combat cards. The fact that they can do the same action back to back is game breaking because, like Rob was saying earlier, this really is a big puzzle. And if, whenever you're trying to optimize and be as efficient as possible, the most optimal thing is maybe to do this action over and over and over again. But with all the other factions, what you have to do is you have to have like a secondary priority. And it's like you're working on 2 things at one time, even though you want to prioritize one. With the Rusviets, you can truly prioritize one thing and spam it, get it done, not worry about it anymore, then go spam another thing. And especially for new players, I usually recommend that they play Rusviet because they don't have to think as big in the long game. They can just focus on like one objective at a time. And for me, that makes Rusviet the clear standout best faction. What do y'all think?
So I mean, I would agree. I think the Rusviet they're my number one. And part of it is the being able to take the two actions twice in a row. And I thought it was interesting, Rob. I guess you can take the Rusviets and be a sort of a military person pushing people around because if you take a worker with you, you get the extra combat card, right? But that's only going to last so long, and you can only get so many stars from that. There's another faction that gets can get fight and get a ton of stars from it. But I think where the Russians, Rusviets win out is production, because they start with an area where if your first 2 turns you do produce, you have 5 workers, and then you can just start cranking out material, and they start with metal and oil, so you could be pumping out your mechs, you can be pumping out your upgrades. So they're like a production king, and so that, like, I think Mitchell hit on it, it's a great. I mean, I think Nords are also not too bad for a new player because of the ability to move your guys out and get all the production you need. But I think for a newer player, there's Fiats, man, that you can just really pump out a bunch of stuff. And if in your first 6 turns you do produce 4 times, you're almost going to have enough oil. If you do a move in there, oil or metal, to pump out all your mechs or pump out all your upgrades. So you can get to the point very quickly with Rusviets midpoint of the game where you've already produced all the goods you're going to need to finish out all your other actions. And like you said, Rob, is how many bottom actions do you get? And I think I'd be interested to see. There's probably statistics out there, I'm sure, because there's people out there that do this, that say, like, if you do this, you'll get more lower actions. And I just played a game with Rusviet earlier today, and it was like every time I went, I was getting the bottom action. I'm like, oh, I'm liking this. It's so yeah. Anyway,
yeah, this is definitely a game with the gurus that, like you say, their statistics up and down and sideways. And I played a couple of games with a guy named Greg from Orlando, who was a master at this game, and I'm sure he's got thousands of plays under his belt now. But the beginning of these games can be scripted because each of the factions start in the same place every time, so they're going to start with the same starting area. And so again, there is some variability on the economic board that you would get, but just from the beginning of the game, when we would pass out all the stuff and Greg would look at us, he could go around and tell each of us, okay, your first 3 turns should be this, and then this. Okay, your first 3 turns are this, and this. I mean, they were scripted. He already knew what everybody should do if they're playing the game, quote unquote, right. So just a little side note there, but let me jump over to my opinion on Rusviets. They have a soft spot in my heart. I played the Fenris campaign, which I believe is a 12-game campaign. We played an 8-player campaign and got through it in about 3 or 4 months. I think it took us, playing about once a week. And I played the Rusviets. I didn't do particularly well in most of the games. I think I only won maybe 2 of the 11 leading up to the finale for the Fenris campaign. The Fenris campaign, each of the games you play give you bonuses going into that last game. And so the last game is a winner take all. It's a one-shot deal. Whoever wins that last game wins the whole thing, but you're building up by going through. And so I ended up winning that last one by just whatever stroke of luck. I barely beat Nick Oben in our group, and ended up winning the whole campaign, which was a lot of fun. But Rusviets, again, in my research and just from what I know, they are pretty wildly known as the number one faction. They are one of the factions that has a broken combination. I think it's Rusviet and Industrial. That's a banned combination, and it's just the way, again, with their starting territory, the resources they can get early. I believe it's with the metal. With the industrial board, I think the metal resource, the iron resource, the mechs only cost, I think it's 2 of those. And so in the first 8 turns or 7 turns of the game, you can build all 4 mechs if you have that combination, and that's why it's broken. After that, you can go in whatever direction. It's just so that board doesn't work well, and it's been banned in competitive play. And anytime I play with people who know the game, we agree ahead of time that doesn't happen. There's one other combination I can't remember off.
I think it's Crimea Patriotic.
Okay, there you go. So you've done your homework. You got it there. But Rusviet, being able to spam the same one, just like Mitchell said, I can just take turn after turn after turn and just build up the oil and the metal resource, and I can then just do those actions over and over and over again. I can just take 4 rounds and finish all my mechs. I can take 6 rounds or whatever it is, finish all my upgrades, and then just move on to the next thing. And so it's 2 stars that you can get out of the 6 to potentially end the game without really even having to think and do much. So I like the Ruseviettes. I agree that they are very powerful. They probably are my number one. Also, it's hard to argue with that. They're both good at the economic game, like Wayne said. And then again, from my research and stuff, saying that, like you mentioned, there's only 2 points you can get from combat, so that only counts for that. But the Ruseviettes have good power. They have ways usually to bump their power track up quickly, so they can get those win those 2 combats usually without having to think about much, and then get that 3rd star out of the 6 on the board. So. Yeah, I think it'd be hard to argue against the Ruseviettes being a top 1 or 2 in the game.
Yeah, I think we all agree it's our number ones. And yeah, I've never heard a review of this game that didn't say Rusviet was the best. But,
Yeah.
All right, moving on to Polania. Polania's special ability is that they can choose 2 options on encounter cards. Basically, there are these little compasses around the board. If your character ends movement on it, they can choose between 3 options. One of them is going to be free. One of them is going to have a small cost, a small benefit. One of them is going to have a larger cost and a larger benefit. Usually, you can only pick one. Polania can pick 2. Mech abilities, mechs and characters can move onto lakes and teleport between lakes. And also, after combat, their other one, you don't lose popularity for forcing enemy workers to retreat. This, for me, is a clear number 2 behind Rusviet. Whenever I look just at the faction abilities, I think Polania's is just all right. It's average. It's equal with some of the other middling ones, because it's very situational. I mean, in some games, I only get 1 encounter. For Polania to really take advantage of that, they really need to be bebopping all around the board, which is easy with the legs. But really, what makes this a top tier faction for me is not just the ability to walk onto the legs, but to teleport between legs. Because in this game, so much of your victory depends on mobility, especially the way I play the game. Like Rob was saying, my first 3 turns, as soon as I see what my mat combinations are, I know exactly what I'm doing my first several turns. But in mid to late game, once I have my engine built and I've got a few achievements and I go and I venture out into the board, it's really dependent upon where other people are to be able to accomplish objectives like controlling areas and winning victories for stars. And with Polania, especially if you have a factory ability, which lets you move twice, and the speed mech, which adds +1, you can move 3 times. With being able to teleport not only between mines like everybody else, but also between lakes, there's almost no space on the board that you can't get to once you have your river walk as well. So once you're all beefed up as Polania, in any given turn, you can almost go to any tile. And I think that's incredibly important for end game. So that's why they're my number 2.
So I actually had them as like my least favorite. And part of it could be, I think, again, part of it is it's not just the faction, but I kind of looked at the starting area. I think they have the weakest starting area. You don't have any access to oil or metal right off the bat. And so there's some trial there. And I think the, you said that the Nord ability, to cross rivers with the workers is kind of like, man, it goes away later. I think the ability to choose two options in the encounter cards is not, if you're hunting those cards to try to get 3 or 4 or 5 encounters, how much what else are you skipping to do that?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you only get the 1 or 2 or maybe 3 that most people will get in a game, and that's, I'm just assuming, in all the games I played, I get maybe 2 or maybe a third if I get lucky. So I don't know how important that is as an ability. And I think I'll preface saying that I played Polania a few times when I first started playing the game, and so I probably didn't use their move abilities as well, because I wasn't fully grasping the move ability. So I probably do need to go back and play them a little bit better. I think the camaraderie is pretty good. You don't lose the popularity when forcing enemy workers to retreat. So that could be good. So I don't think that their base ability, I think my issue with Polania is building your engine, and depending on what board you get, without access to, if you get a board that means you need 4 oil or 4 metal, it's going to be tough if you're Polania. So,
well, I mean, for me, whenever I look at that economy board, that's what helps me make those decisions. I look at the cost and how much money you get from them, and that's what directs my game. You always got to get at least a couple mechs out, at least with the way I play. And so, a couple of turns doing a trade, I can pump out 1 or 2 mechs. But sorry, I interrupted. That was
that's good. I think I'll probably continue to play just to, give it, keep
Shocker.
Shocker. No, keep learning. Because I mean, maybe we revisit this in a couple of months and say like, all right, I've played another 5 or 10 times and I changed my mind on Polania, or
After all that revenue from Stonemeyer stops coming in because he listened to this.
Yeah,
and,
right. Not even that. No, but so I mean, I think that I had them ranked last because I just didn't. I think their starting area really hinders them, and that's where I put them for that. Yeah. Rob.
Yeah, I put Polania in the middle somewhere. I don't. Well, let me again go back to the number of players. So some of the research I was looking at online states that again, this is one that can be very dependent on the number of players because of that. The encounter card ability, like you mentioned, Mitchell, if you're playing with a higher player counts, you may only get the one encounter from your. I called it an event earlier, but an encounter from your starting area. That may be the only one you get to if you're playing on a crowded board. If you're only playing a 2 or 3 player game, and Polani is allowed to wander the map and get out and get 3 or 4 different encounters. I remember I had a particular game we played at 8 player where I had Polani and I just felt like I was handcuffed because I really was trying to maximize that ability. It seemed like every time I wanted to go after an encounter, as I started to head towards it, somebody would jump on it. And it was like, oh, well, that was a waste of a move action. Now, I got to go find something else to do. I got to go in a different direction, do something different. The submerging mechs, again, almost feel broken, being able to teleport around from lake to lake. I mean, again, the mobility that provides you is powerful, whether it's just blocking people from going somewhere that they may want to go, or, obviously if you're trying to pick up those stars from the combat actions, being able to find the weaker spots where somebody may have an unprotected mech or, an unprotected resource where you can just kind of pop in, grab that, spend it up before they get a chance. So I think I remember in the research I've done, Polani has been rated near the top, usually like maybe 2 or 3 behind the Rusviets in the Gurus ratings. So there's no doubt that they're powerful and they have some cool things. They're maybe not as much fun for me to play. And again, most of my plays have been at higher player counts. I've really enjoyed this game with 5 or 6 or 7 players. But I think that can again, especially for Polani, can taint your view of how they play. So
I'm changing the topic really quickly, but I just remembered because you mentioned Rise of Fenris and playing with a high player count. Actually, whenever we played the Rise of Fenris campaign, I don't know who decided this, but we basically, not we, someone decided that me and 2 of my friends were the best players at this game. So whenever we were randomly choosing factions, they put the 2 expansion factions and the Nords and mix them up, and we had to get those 3. So I feel like that's concrete proof that the Nords are inferior, just FYI.
Yeah, those 2,
so
we're not getting into it tonight, but those 2 expansion factions, I think, in my opinion, would be the weakest. I played around with both of them a little bit, but I really didn't like either one of those very much.
Yeah, I agree. Sorry, I got us off topic, but back on topic. We're on to Saxony now.
Yep.
So Saxony's ability is that the number of stars they get from combat and objectives is not limited. So usually you can get 1 star from accomplishing one of your 2 secret objectives, and up to 2 stars for each combat 1 star for each combat you win up to 2 times. With Saxony, you could get as many as you want from those. Mech abilities, mechs and characters can move to and from mountains and tunnels as if they were adjacent. A little bit more mobility, not nearly as much as the lakes, in my opinion. And also, the opponent loses 2 power if a combat takes place on a tunnel or a mine. So I put Saxony around 4. It's not as bad as the Nords, but here's why. Their main thing is they're combat heavy, right? The way that I play the game, depending on my economy board, is, remember I talked about with unless you Rusviet, you kind of have to pick a primary and a secondary focus because you can't spam one thing. So what I found works really well is my primary focus is to max out whatever of the 4 abilities I have resources for and give me the most money based on my board. My secondary is usually to max out my power. And usually I can finish those around the same time. And then I have at least 2 stars. Then I kind of venture out into the board to interact with other people. I try not to fight before then, because if I go out and fight and I'm losing power, I have to keep bouncing back up to get to the top of the power. So once I get to that point, that gives me enough power to win 2 victories and with max power, because the most you can spend is 7 and the max power you can get is 16. And there's 4 stars right there. I would have to go up and ring that bell again almost to get enough power to win more combats. And it just feels a little bit redundant whenever there are other faster ways to do that. Because to me, this game is a race to get as many points as you can before somebody else ends it or before you end it. And with the accomplishing multiple objectives, I've literally had objectives before that you cannot accomplish both of them. Like one of them is like, don't have more than 3 workers, which once you put workers out, you can't get them back. And then another one may be like, I don't know, I can't think of an example, but literally there are sometimes where you cannot do both of them. So that's just inferior to me. So I put them as number 4.
I'm gonna jump out of turn real quick here, just with a quick thought, Wayne, before it jumps out of my head here. But with the Saxony, you've really got to prey on the weak. I mean, and that can be a good feeling or a bad feeling in this game. But you can get you can win a lot of battles if somebody is not pushing their power and they're not collecting a bunch of cards to defend themselves. And you can pick on, again, I've had those games where I've felt kind of bad about it, but picked on fighting the same person over and over and over again, and having to spend almost no power and beating them 2 or 3 or 4 times in a row in combat. So just as a side note, I mean, there is a way to play them, and it can be a fun way to play. But go ahead, Wayne. What are your thoughts on Saxony?
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, so Saxony, I have them sort of in that same tier as the Nords, and so that's in the bottom half of the 5. I have the, although I guess I got to replay Playin a bunch, right? Is what I got to learn. But I like, Saxony's the one opportunity, or the opportunity to try to turn this into the war game that everyone thought it was,
based on the components,
and the look and the feel of the game. But I think, like Rob said, is you build up your fighting ability. You go out and have one battle, so you don't expend it all, and then you kind of wait, and you have to time it to wait. This is towards the end of the game where you can go out. I like to not do combat with them until the second half of the game. Just do that one early to get your star, and then after everyone else does their combats to get their stars, then you go out and prey on them when they're weak again. So you have to time that. So it takes a little timing, a little effort to get that done. But I also think that they start with oil and metal, and a village, so you can pump out people and pump out the resources, to build up your upgrades, build up your mechs. So you can do some good stuff there. But I do think that, like you said, the mountains and tunnels is not as powerful as the Playin ability now that you think about it more. The river, the lakes. They're losing two power. That's if someone's dumb enough to go into a tunnel or mountain mine, you got to go hit them, right? I think that's where you get that benefit, is you have to pay attention to the board and strike, do that. Hey, the Saxony, the Germans got a blitzkrieg, right? And you have to make sure take your picks and go out and attack the weaker opponents. So I like them. I like to fight. Again, I tried turning it into a war game. Wasn't super successful with them, but I liked playing them.
I agree. I think I kind of like playing them. I hate playing against them. In the Fenris campaign, I can't recall who was playing them. It's been a couple years since we played, but I was really frustrated by the person who played them. Learned pretty early on that they could just lock down the tunnel spaces, and they could get mechs on 3 of I think there's about 5 tunnel spaces on the board, and they could just lock those areas down. So anybody who needed to rely on the tunnels to get around or to get out of their home area, that they would have to have overwhelming power to go in and push Playin out of those spots. And so, or I'm sorry, Saxony, not Playin, push the Saxons out of those spots. And so I put them somewhere in the middle of the pack. They're not my favorite to play. They're not my least favorite. Again, as I said before, if I'm feeling combat-y and I'm feeling like, hey, that's the route I want to go, it's a fun way to play. If you want to play that direct confrontation, if you want to pick on the weak, battle whenever you want to battle, you can just kind of sit in those powerful tunnel spots, and usually people won't mess with you, and then you can kind of wait your turn until somebody leaves something unprotected, a stray mech or a stray couple resources, and you can just go in and pounce on them and take them. So it's a very, I feel that's a very predatory faction that you can kind of play that way. I don't feel that it's good as far as winning the game, though. I don't think it's powerful as far as being able to do multiple different things to get those different stars. I mean, you really got to focus on combat and probably get at least 3 or 4 stars through the combat route. So not my favorite, but I wouldn't say the worst.
All right. And that brings us to Crimea. Their special ability is once per turn, they can use a combat card as a wild resource. Their mech abilities, mechs and characters can move from a territory to your home base or to another inactive home base. And also before combat, they can steal 1 combat card from an opponent. For Crimea, I put them right in the middle at 3. Using a combat card as a resource, depending on your economy board, can be useful. In the last game we played, all three of us played a game the other day. The way my economy board worked out, because I started with food, I pumped out all my enlist very quickly. And so anytime anybody and myself was doing enlist, I was getting combat cards. So I had a ton of combat cards. So almost every turn I was using them as a wild. And not only does that let you do more actions, but also you have more resources left over for points at the end of the game. But if you're in a situation where you don't have a lot of combat cards and you're having to pay for them using that bolster action, it's kind of like you don't want to use this ability. Being able to teleport to inactive home bases or to your home base, it's pretty useless in my opinion. I don't really want to go to an inactive home base and be stuck on that peninsula or way down on one of the expansion ones, unless there's somebody there very situational. The most useful of their abilities, I think, is stealing a combat card from an opponent, because whenever you sit down and you do the math on how a combat could go down, you don't know what their combat card numbers are. If they only have, one combat card, and you can steal it from them, it doesn't even matter what that number is. If you have the right amount of power, you can beat them. So that's why I put it around number 3.
So I actually had them as my number 2. I've enjoyed my plays of them, and then you've played them twice in the games we played against each other, and did really well with them. I think the again, food, village, metal is a good starting resources. The stealing of combat cards is big, and so if you can kind of focus on an engine of producing combat cards, and then you have dual use of it. One, I can go combat and steal a card, and then I can turn around and use that card next round for a resource. I think that's pretty powerful. I agree, though, that moving to inactive bases is kind of a useless thing. The only benefit of that, though, is if you're going to hunt for some encounters. Those inactive bases have an encounter, in that area that you can go grab.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some benefit there. Especially if you're playing against somebody who's Playin, who's going for those encounters, you can jump out and grab them from it. So I think that they've, in all the games I've played, they've done well, and they've never been the bottom. They may not always win because Rusviets win or somebody, whatever. But I feel like this is a faction that you're never going to do horrible with, and you may not always do fantastic with. They're just a really good, solid group to play with.
I'm going to poo-poo them, though. They're my least favorite to play. And again, it's probably been pretty situational. Maybe it's the few times that I've played them, I've had a bad economic board that just hasn't matched up with what I'm trying to do. But I felt like every time I've played them, either whether I've done it to myself or whether it's just the way things worked out, that I feel handcuffed by not ever feeling like I have enough combat cards to effectively use them. It seems like always when I need that one more resource, I've got the one combat card that's a 5, and then it's like, I have to make these hard decisions. Do I spend this really valuable combat card? I mean, if you're drawing all lower combat cards, you got a handful of them. Awesome. I mean, hey, I get resources for days. I can use these to do things. But for whatever reason, like I say, 3, maybe 2, 3, 4 times I've played them, it seems like I've never had those, either whether I've used them up too fast or whatever. And I end up in these hard decisions as, is it worth spending this pretty solid, pretty valuable combat card for that combat that I'm probably going to need later to pop that 5th or 6th star, to just get a resource, maybe to do a bottom action one time. And I feel like I'm constantly having to weigh those choices, and it makes them way more thinkier than I think they need to be. The other part I feel about it is I think they are a very mech dependent. You've got to get a couple of those mechs out. The Wayfarer mech that allows you to move to those territories. And I guess let me touch on that again. I've hit this several times here, but again, that it can be very dependent again on the number of players. I can cruise around with my leader and pop encounter after encounter after encounter by jumping back and forth to these different unoccupied starting hex spaces. I can pop into an area within a move or two, get an encounter, get back out, get somewhere else, and so you can on an open board you can really cruise around and make that happen. Again, with that Wayfarer mech. The other one is the Scout mech. Again, that whole ability of being able to steal those combat cards from your opponents is you've got to get that Scout mech out. So those 2 mechs are really important here. And again, if you get an economy board that makes your mechs cost 4 iron, 4 steel, or whatever the resource is there, it makes it a lot harder to get those mechs out to be able to capitalize on those additional abilities. And so I don't know. Again, I recognize that they're, like I say, rated constantly as number 2 or number 3. I find them my least favorite to play, and it's probably just from a couple of bad experiences. So as I play them more, maybe that'll change, but I think they're my least favorite.
All right. Well, those were our rankings of the Scythe-based factions. Feel free to reach out. Let us know if we were wrong. We were
Oh
right.
yeah, comment plenty.
Yeah. Don't forget, before we let you go, check out the call-in show every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. We're going to be talking board games, but really what we wanted for you guys to call in and tell us what you've been playing or to give your 2 cents, and you get to take over the show for a few minutes and kind of direct the conversation. So that's we're looking forward to hearing from you guys then. We are the Beans and Dice Podcast, a podcast about
How we game.
I'm Mitchell.
I'm Rob.
And I'm Wayne.
Thanks for listening. Take it easy.
Thanks for watching the Beans and Dice podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe.